But I think it's worth to bear with me for those 40 minutes or 50 minutes. Oh, by the way, I believe that I will finish a little bit earlier, so if you have any questions, hopefully we'll have a few minutes for that. Few words about me. I'm flying acro drones, building electronics. This is my son. I started, as probably most of you, as a, let's say, classic sysadmin with Linux systems, worked for various companies. I jumped to the OpenStack for some time, and now I shifted mostly to AWS and surrounding technologies. I love drinking beer and look at the graphs. That's, yeah, but I work for OLX. Maybe not many of you know that OLX is a global company. We operate in 43 countries. I'm an infrastructure team lead of Europe division, so we are divided into continents basically. In Europe we operate 10 OLXs on daily basis. We do have 150,000 requests per second in peak hours to our front ends. Around 40 gigabits of traffic, petabyte of images, just to let you know what's the scale. And thanks to that, we are able to test various technologies and prove some ideas, and that was the reasoning behind today's talk. And just another slide just to show you that we have a lot of brands all over the world, with OLX as one of the biggest one, Letgo in US, Avito in Russia, Dabizel in Dubai. Funny fact, OLX Poland is the biggest OLX in the world. Agenda for today. I would like to divide my presentation into four topics. First of all, I will say a few words about Agile in general, then about SRE in general. Then I jump to how we leverage those technologies in our stack and how we connected few of the frameworks which you may know and use. And at the end, few lessons learned just as a wrap-up. So first of all, why not about technology this time? We're just finishing a migration to AWS. We migrated all OLXs in Europe to AWS fully, 100%. No bare metal anymore. We already sold our old servers. And it was a little bit harsh to migrate those monoliths. I will get back to that later in the detail, but when we were thinking about the migration, it sounded like a huge thing. We have all this traffic which I mentioned, all those users, we don't accept too much downtime. It was overwhelming at the beginning, I would say. If you operate in your data center, you have everything set up, it works better or worse, but you know what you have. And then we said, we no longer work with bare metal. That's why I thought it will be worth mentioning this migration, because we choose those technologies. I mean, we changed our team from classic sysadmins to, or grow our team from classic sysadmins to more SRE approach. We started leveraging Agile, and we decided to operate in cloud. And I believe those three principles, or SREs, as you know, the name of the position. Agile is a framework, and cloud is a move or shift which people do. So I believe it's worth connecting those three in this talk especially. Let's start with few basics, just a quick one. So what does it mean to do Agile? I believe that many of you do that. How many of you do daily stand-ups? Yeah, quite a lot of you. But how many of you do retrospectives on a regular basis? Yeah, I see a lot of hands, but not that much as stand-ups. How many of you do plannings or planning pokers, or the names are different and varies between companies. Okay, so this is a popular part of your work. So Agile is a general term, right? You probably know that, but there are multiple flavors of Agile, and especially for projects, I believe they are not that well known. So many people do Kanban, many people do Scrum, but not so many people tackle projects in Agile PM, for example. I will take an example of Agile PM because that's what we do. So Agile in general, you probably say that people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And that's true probably, and that's one of the most advantages of Agile. But Agile is not only about not known feature. I remember a few years ago, when people were starting doing Agile, they thought that we don't know where we go. We just developing and see what's happened, then we think what to develop next. And this is not what we would like to see doing a migration to AWS. Because we had a clear target, we had a clear deadline because we didn't want to extend our contract in data centers, so we set up the expiration of the contract as our deadline, basically. So we had to go a little bit smarter than the basic Agile which people do. This is a slide from Agile PM methodology. I don't want to go through the details of this because it's not for today. But what's important here is that the project does have phases, and iterating over the development process is only one of the phases. Plus, it's fixed time. So it's not that we work until infinity with Agile, but we set up tasks at the beginning, we do milestones, then we iterate over them, and achieve what we want to achieve. Then there is a deployment phase, which is a general term in Agile PM, but this is actually end of the project, and there is a post-project phase, which is out of scope for today. So how to actually, if we are not fully aware what we want to achieve, how to actually achieve it. And I will go into details a little bit later, but let's jump straight to the rituals. So this is what I asked you. How many of you are doing those things? Because maybe it's just my experience, but I know many companies which do stand-ups, but nothing else. They just meet every day just to say, well, how are you? But at the end, they not necessarily do retrospectives, planning pokers, or, oh, it's not a bore, it's a board review, right? So, how we organize our board, it's pretty much by the book, with few exceptions. And why there are exceptions? Because I believe that Agile is a framework, and we shouldn't be slaves of methodology, but rather use methodology for our purpose. So we do epics, and I gave an example of the epic name which we could have. For us, there are big chunks. We were iterating over each OLX we have, and we also iterated over some services, which are shared services between all OLXs. That's why that's a great example how the epic could look like for OLXPL, let's say. Then we have stories, which are mandatory, and they break the epic. Oh, and this is already part of Agile PM, so let me take a step back. Those epics, by the book of Agile PM, you should have like 10 of them maximum. They should be workable and well-defined, known to the business, known to the technical department, so the whole company is aware about them. Then there are stories, which you should work with your project managers, or if you don't have one, maybe with a team, and decide what are the steps which will drive us to get to the epic, to achieve the epic. What's important with stories, and how we can actually keep the deadline, not knowing fully what's needed in order to achieve our goals, because tasks at the end, which in our case are optional, because sometimes when we were iterating over the migration, stories were enough to define the goal. That's why I put optional next to the task. Yeah, but there are 3 kinds of stories, and this is also by the book of Agile Project Management. First one are must-have. Second type is could-have, and third one is nice-to-have. And this is how you achieve your goals, because must-haves guarantee that OLXPL will be on AWS, but could-have may involve upgrade of some technology, migrating to Elastic Cache instead of running on-premise caches. But it's a could-have. And nice-to-have is something which you would like to have. I mean, it's nice to have, basically. So it would be good to reinvent this particular part of our infrastructure. It would be great to review our MC router setup, because it's not perfect, but it's a nice to have. If we're running out of time because there were some obstacles on the other parts of or on other stories, then we just throw away this ticket. And bugs, obviously, I will not go through them. Epics are pretty straightforward. That's why I put here example story, and I took an example of DevOps Days and how we could tackle the problems of building a presentation, because Agile PM is general purpose. It's not only intended to be a part of IT projects, but it can be also used to general purpose projects. I don't want to go through the details, so but rather show you what's important for us in OLX and what seems to work as a good pattern. There are 3 mandatory parts of each user story: description, or name, of course, description, proposed solution, and what's most important, acceptance criteria. And even more important part in acceptance criteria is what is out of scope. It turned out that good definition of what shouldn't be part of this story is even more important than actually the content of the or proposed solution or what needs to be done. Many of us would probably say, yeah, you want to do a presentation, so you know you need to build 40 slides, let's say. But what's out of scope in our projects turn out to be a very important part. And that was my general understanding of Agile PM. I would say how we do it in practice. We'll get back to it in more details later on. Let's jump to the SRE. I saw those nifty Google cards that Google is hiring SREs. So thanks to Google, we have site reliability engineering idea, which, if I have you here, I can use this opportunity to say that, in my opinion, DevOps is not a job title. SRE, probably, but DevOps is rather a methodology. Sorry, I had to say that. But what's site reliability engineer? Part of my job is going to the interviews and interviewing people, and now in OLX we only interview for site reliability engineers positions, and I suddenly discovered that many people don't understand it. I believe it's not the case for you guys, but still, let's go through those points. So this is, I believe, one of the most common understanding of SRE. It's fully true. Solve infrastructure problems like a developer would do. Let's go through the example. If I would have to create an invoice as a classic sysadmin, sysops, I would probably just log into SSH and fill in the invoice. If I would be a developer, I would probably create a system which will generate the invoice. And that's, I believe, main difference and the mind shift which we have to go through, especially when shifting from more classic sysops to DevOps or SRE. Share the pain, share the gain. And this is something which was very important for us in OLX. As we couldn't tackle the migration sitting in the basement with our birds and logging into SSH anymore. Such a huge migration and making OLX possible to run in the cloud. I especially refer to our monolith, because we still have a monolith. We build services and microservices, but it's not that easy for us to get rid of monoliths, so some parts of our applications are still running the monolith. And this is mostly what I'm referring to. Services are a different story. I actually had a talk on Atmosphere this year, which is also organized by PROIDEA, about services and how we tackle them, how we run them. But here I would like to focus on the monolith, because it's not the perfect fit for the cloud. So it needs some adjustments in order to run efficiently. Share the pain, share the gain. What I'm referring here is you need to cooperate, and not only cooperate with developers, which is very important. Our migration team was consisting of five SREs and 2 developers on daily basis, so we could tackle the stories which were also touching the application without waiting, creating tickets. So this is one of the ideas of Agile, that the team can be or should be self-containing. It should be able to tackle stories without interfering with other teams, or at least minimize those. But we also made AWS migration a big event in the company overall. We spoke with business, we created presentations, we informed every people who could interfere with us during that migration that it will be happening, and we will need to adjust, slow down development, do this, do that. And this is what I mean by share the pain, share the gain here. Embrace risk. This is a very important point, because there's no place for mistakes when you have a huge system to migrate. And I believe that embracing risk in classic sysadmin, sorry for referring to that term all the time, but I believe it gives you a good overview. It's not like, let's close our eyes and hit enter. I had a friend who, I entered the room, and my friend was pushing, he just pushed enter on his keyboard and then start hitting Control-C, shouting, I was joking, that was a joke. So, yeah, you need to embrace risk. You have to have data, you have to plan, you have to have fallback, revert procedure, and so on and so on. Making a gradual changes. This is And this is where SRE meets Agile very well, or I mean, they fit together very well. SRE will say the same things which Agile say. Do not try to tackle everything everywhere. Focus on a topic, iterate over it, and so on and so on. And yeah, I was mentioning measuring everything, but for us, data is very important. This is our wall in the office where it slightly changed recently, but yeah, this is how we measure our stuff. Those graphs are important for us. We change them frequently. We automate. We're triggering alerts when there are anomalies on those graphs. This is very important to know what actually happened. Imagine the situation where you finally cut over the OLX from bare metal data center to AWS, and then what? You need to know what happened. If the site is accessible, does it work? Does payment work? Does images are loading? What not? You need to have data. But yeah, enough theory. Let's jump to a case study. I mean, I was referring to it all the time, but let's go through an example. And yes, we were not drunk during migration. Those are non-alcoholic beers. This is what I was just saying. Hope is not a strategy. You need to know. You need to have data, and let's stop for a second and think about those two examples or those two methodologies which I was referring to in a minute ago, SRE and Agile. They both promote the same values. So Agile say a lot about close feedback loop with the business, with product owners. SRE the same. You need to have data. You need to know what's happening. And if you remind yourself the first slide with the hertz, that's where we believe it's all fit together. So again, at the beginning, if you look at this picture of New York from the 25th floor, there is a lot of complexity here. There are cars which are not even visible. There are those skyscrapers which are so huge that they were not that I was not able to fit them into the frame. And there are those small buildings which are there for last 120 years probably. And if I think about this image, I see OLX in the bare metal data center. That was what we had. A lot of legacy were operating there for many years. Everyone were doing their best. We built those skyscrapers, but we also had this legacy. So, how to actually tackle the complexity of such migration? Just 3 points here for our strategy, because I believe one of the rules which should be at the beginning is keep it simple. Slice logically. So that's what I mean by choosing the right parts on which you want to iterate. I will jump into case study in a minute, but slicing the big picture is a very important part, and this is probably the well-known true, and you probably heard it 1,000 times that the complex problem is a set of small problems. Tackle the monolith cutover at the end. This is OLX specific, so we had to do a cutover because of many factors. So that's probably something specific to us. Start with least critical systems. Usually, if we think of complex things which we have to do, we have a deadline, we have 10 OLXs and 20 services to migrate. We should start with those most important. And that was our thinking at the beginning. But then we changed our mind. that was actually a great idea to start with least critical systems, because they were never left back. They were never forgotten. We didn't have any system which we had to migrate a day before disabling the old data center, because we started with those least important stuff. We learned a lot. We iterated over the infrastructure during those those migrations of not very important systems for customer from customer point of view, because OLX is very customer centric, and if I'm referring to critical systems, I mean those which are impacting our customers. So we started tackling the complex system, the complex problem, and actually we produced like 40 graphs like those. Those are only examples. So we created a 10,000 feet overviews. We had to find out what we actually have to migrate, what we can left over, and so on and so on. Then we created the timelines, and this is where I'm going back to the Agile methodology. There were deadlines, there were sprints, there were well-known dates of cutovers for each OLX. So maybe I'm wrong, but what I wanted to tell you here is that Agile is not going into the darkness without knowing the future, but you can work out a project which does have a starting date and end date with Agile PM in this example. And this is the real life example of what we have to do. So images, we have more than petabyte of images in OLX. And this is a shared service for all OLXs in Europe. So that was at the beginning quite challenging to us. We had few clusters which were there for many years. Cattle and pets, right? So we were always fixing stuff on those clusters, and we wanted to stop that. Oh, this guy, he's a master of these photos. Sorry. We created user stories. There were 7 initially. Design and build, straightforward. We designed a pretty simple service. It was a few years ago already, I mean 2 years ago or more. With our knowledge on AWS back then, each of us had some experience, but maybe not on that scale, and so on and so on. So we came out with such a design. This is our app. We prepared ourselves. We prepared an app. We learned app to use S3. And this is where I was referring to the team that we had few SREs and few developers, and this is where we were cooperating very closely. And the biggest benefit of working in such a small team, which had to tackle multiple issues or challenges in both app level and infrastructure level, was that we were all looking at the code of the application. We were all looking at the code of the infrastructure. So preparing to this presentation, I went through my Slack history with the room of the migration team. We were sending tons of the code snippets from the app and then from the infrastructure, and both developers and SREs were cooperating on solving those problems. If you see a small if statement copied into Slack, you can understand it. Everyone can, right? So it's not that you see this monolith which is huge and you cannot understand what's happening there. There are a lot of directories, files, and so on and so on. You have a small snippet with one if and some statements which are easy to read. You learn very rapidly, even working with the legacy technology. then we embraced risk. So we created S3 buckets, prepared everything, all the infrastructure, resize service, watermark service, and so on and so on. And we started writing images to two sources, which is fairly safe. What can possibly go wrong here? Oops. What else? Oh, yeah. That's sorry. And then the critical part: start serving images from new service and discover if your design was okay or not. So we use kind of A/B tests here. We started with small percentages of our clients. Then we were increasing and increasing the amount of images which were served from the new source. And oh, sorry for the red one, but that was meant to be the one of the most important points here. So the last point here, which you cannot see, is revisit and adjust. If you look at the original diagram, that's completely different stuff comparing to what we have now. But we tackled the problem with the simple steps, with the simple user stories, without doing fancy stuff, and that's thanks to Agile, I believe. And then we added those last points to revisit and iterate over it over and over on a daily basis, not necessarily doing the project. So we generated 45,000 lines of code during the migration, 500 tickets or user stories, if you wish, 1,400 commits, 6 people. For me, it's impressive because I would never say that I will generate so much code. I mean, I or we as a team, that's a huge amount of code. And it's mostly Terraform, Packers, pipelines, and such kind of stuff. It's pretty clean. What are the lessons learned here? First of all, we were working in a multi-regional team. Our team consists of people working from home, people working from one office in Poznań, people work from office in Berlin. We also had a few guys working from Argentina helping us. So it was challenging for us to not skip rituals, which became critical, I would say, on some point, that we are all in sync, we know what we're doing, we know we're going to the right direction, and especially with the different time zones, it can be challenging sometimes to not skip the rituals, but for me, that's the lesson learned number one. If you not skip rituals, you're halfway through. Keep all communication on communicators. That was biting us over and over at the beginning. That we had few people in Poznań, and we were discussing stuff and then implementing it, and then guys from Argentina were saying, "What the hell happened here? Where is my infrastructure?" There's a funny story behind approver is not merging but author. And this is again the reference to multiple offices, remote work, and so on. We had a rule that you need an approve in order to merge a PR, and it became painful to if a lot of Terraform changes were merged during the migration by reviewers. So you never knew what's in master or your deployment branch. Because and then actually to get the control back, we decided to set up this rule that approver is not merging but author. So I'm the author of the solution. I wrote it. Someone said it's okay-ish. It can go to production. So maybe I should merge it. But no, if you merge it, then you have the kind of unknown state in your pipeline or Git repository. If I'm the author, and it refers especially for the infrastructure code, I'm adding a new cluster, I'm changing the size of RDS database, and so on and so on. Author know best when this change should be merged and when it should be deployed. This is pretty straightforward, this is pretty straightforward, isn't it? One PR, one change, one user story. This rule was set up after one commit when we were working in a high stress, and one of our guys he wrote multiple things in single branch, multiple changes. There was no possibility to revert it in a Git flow, so pretty straightforward rule, but I would like to stress that it's sometimes very important to keep such things clean. Testing. This is I'm not a testing expert, but the minimum which you should have is to run those plans, or at the beginning, when there were no pipelines, we were applying Terraform manually. We had a rule that you put a plan as a comment to your commit, so the reviewer can understand what will actually change. This is pretty basic. If you're just starting with AWS or Terraform, I think it can help a lot. Same for Ansible. It's worth running a check, even if your change is small and you're 100% sure it will not fail. It will probably fail, right? If PR includes Packer code, you have to test it somehow. Now we have two pipelines. One builds on development environment, and then it's applied to production, so the same rule. Lessons learned continued. More organizational points. So I believe and I was referring it quite often during the presentation. And this is fully related to Agile, right? So you have your deadline. You have those stories which are musts. You have those stories which are could have, and you have those stories which are nice to have. Thanks to that, you can balance between time and feature set which you want to have. In that case study which I mentioned, that infrastructure for the image resize was not perfect at all. It never failed actually, because it's pretty straightforward in general, but the technology behind it could be better. And we iterated over it later on, and it had more time. But during the migration, I saw that people tend to lose focus sometime, and we are all engineers. We love fancy features. We love to build a monster on the first shot. Sometimes it's worth giving up and then getting back to it later on. So take shortcuts sometimes. Is kind of related, but not fully. There are situations where you know that you're doing things which are not cloud native, for example. You have to migrate a service as it is. We call it lift and shift. It's okay, as you will fulfill your must in Agile, but not nice to have, which is redesigning the service a little bit. Focus on goals and identify what can work bad in new environment, which sounds dummy, but actually if you sometimes sit and think about it for a few minutes, what could possibly go wrong? We have those saying right now, what could possibly go wrong? And you think about the issue not from the level of fanciness of your solution, but think from the other side. What will happen if this fail? what will happen if that fail. I believe that I covered some, it was pretty short presentation about how we tackled the migration and what we learned in OLX, because I believe that you don't have to go through this long path. We had quite the right scale to prove our ideas and to see what is working and what's not working, at least for us. Hopefully there were some points which could help you in your future careers. Thank you very much.